What's up, Warcoders? Bayou Boogie here, back again, and today we're going to talk about monster builds. So, right now there are two builds that pretty much have defined the meta in King of the Hill. The first is the Titan build. The Titan build is up here at the top of the screen. We've got two monsters that began as 79 hit point 111s, and these monsters are built using the following items. You're going to add the Flare Heart Crystal, which decreases our hit points by 5% but gives us an additional dice attack. We're going to add an Aegis Stone, which means if we resist damage, we resist one extra dice of damage. We're going to add an Elemental Heart Stone. Pick whatever element your current team lacks coverage on, and that'll be your best choice. And finally, we're going to pick an Eagle Stone, which allows us to roll an extra dice on both of our attacks and only use the highest result. So what this will do is if you have a high hit point monster, like a 111, a 211, that deals low damage, such as the D8 damage that we see right here, this will give you a monster that can get up to 100 hit points. It's going to have very low agility with only a 1 or a 2 available, so it's rarely going to dodge attacks, but the hit points allow it to soak up several hits. And it's going to be dealing out enough damage to be getting rid of some of those, especially the low-hitting little guys that do a lot of damage but don't have much health. We prefer a longsword as a secondary on this build because it does the highest damage for a secondary attack, and then that Eagle Stone gives us a second die to roll on both of these attacks. So it just increases that monster's effectiveness against those dodgy little monsters that are really good at avoiding us, but hopefully we can outlast them with the amount of hit points we have and just wear them down. Now Titans, as we like to call them, tend to be better attackers in King of the Hill. They rarely lose because they're taking less damage from that Aegis Stone in their resistance and can just wear down those bigger ones. Now, the opposite end of the spectrum is the Slayer. Slayers are built very similarly, but they tend to be 2 or 3 agility and either do a D12 or D10 damage. These monsters we're going to build with a secondary of a Battle Runestone. This is going to give us an extra dice on our primary attack only. We're not going to worry about a secondary attack. We're also going to add Flare Heart Crystal for another dice. And then we're going to add Large Celestial Shard for even more dice. We'll add the Aegis Stone as well. This gives us a little extra resistance. We can hopefully take at least 1 hit of damage now. And then we're going to add a large Eye Stone, which is going to increase our primary attack value by 1, which is great because we don't even have a secondary attack, so there's no drawback to this item. So what you end up with is monsters with low hit points that have a better chance to dodge, rarely miss, and just do an absolute train wreck of damage. Now, these monsters are a little less reliable on the attack. We have another build right here that's similar. They tend to either just absolutely decimate the opponent or they get smashed and have to try a second or third time. But once they get into a spot, because the defender always gets the first strike, they actually defend better than Titans do. So it's kind of a trade-off which you prefer, Titan or Slayer as a build. There's tons of monsters in between those two builds that can go either way, but these two builds have defined the meta. The Titans will definitely, more times you attack, you'll win. The Slayers, you're going to miss or lose on that initial attack more often, but you're going to get more points because your opponents are going to slam into these guys a few times as well, and they're going to struggle. Now we're going to talk about 2 other builds. They're not necessarily as good as these builds, but they do have a place in the meta. That is the Bound build, which is very similar for Titans. We're going to go with that Flare Heart and that Aegis. We're going to get that extra Heartstone health. But then instead of adding the extra chance to hit, we're going to build even more health in using a Bound item, which will give us an extra weakness. Now, the downside of the bound items is that extra weakness is going to allow your monster to get beat even easier once it has taken the hill. But with that little extra health, it has a better chance to take the hill initially. So these monsters still work well to help you gain points and tokens. They're just not quite as good at getting them after they've taken the high ground. They just won't last very long. Then there's one other build we're going to talk about, which we kind of call the dice cannon, is what I refer to it as. Now, this works in King of the Hill, but not nearly as good as it works in the PvE encounters. So if you're doing the new daily challenges, the PvE stuff, this build is just insane. Because what you're going to do is you're going to take a similar monster to what we use as our Slayers. They're the low health, high dodge, high damage. We're going to build them the same, except for we're going to swap out that Aegis Stone for Wrath Stone. If you're unfamiliar with the Wrath Stone, it adds an additional damage if the opponent has a weakness to your primary attack. So what we're looking at here is this monster is already dealing d12 times 5 minus 2 damage when it hits an opponent. If that opponent is weak to dark, it's going to take an extra dice of damage because that's what happens when you're weak to a monster. The Wrathstone adds another dice. So this guy will deal 7d12 minus 2 damage. Very few monsters survive that strike. That Eye Stone helps make sure he doesn't miss. He's just got to make it past that initial defensive attack, and then he's pretty much going to obliterate anything in his way. Very fun when you just want to roll all the dice in the world at a monster. So those are the main builds that are kind of controlling the meta right now. Anytime a new item gets introduced, there's a chance that things will change. There's also a lot of experimentation out there to see if we can get some of the other items to function well. There are some builds right now that are using the Runestone on the low dice monsters in an effort to make them better at defending. And they do work. They get more defensive wins, but they're suffering more on their initial attacks. So it's kind of a fairly even trade-off. But I highly recommend experiment a little bit, but if you just want to do what most of the people who are getting those high numbers in King of the Hill are doing, these two builds, the Titan and the Slayer, will take you a long ways. All right, everybody, appreciate your time. Thanks for watching the video. Again, this is Bayou Boogie, and I'll see you in the swamp.